Welcome to part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, you'll want to go see that first, where we assemble this much of the pen. Now you'll remember in part 1, we put this taper on the end of the pen like this, and then we've got the 1/4 inch hole, which is for the ferrule on the pen. And I told you that this taper would make sense as we went along. I forget what you call this part of the lathe, but this will fit in here like this. Normally you've got some kind of tool that fits in that has a taper to it, and so we'll put the taper of the pen in, and then I can slide this over like that and just kind of snug that down, and this allows that pen to stay centered. I've tried a lot of different ways on how to make that work with using more traditional types of tools or whatever, but this here seems to work the best. Now I'm going to set my tool rest about like that, and I'm going to use a round gouge like this to cut the shape or the profile of this part of the pen. So we'll do that and see where we go from there. You'll notice this tool doesn't get all the way over, and that's okay. I'll come and clean that part up a little bit later. Maybe zoom in a little bit. I'm going to stop fatter than what I really want it to be because I still have to sand it. And it's kind of hard to get your hand on there because it's going the wrong direction for me. I'm going to kind of grip that section and test that fit with my hand, and that feels about right to me. Now I'm going to use this smaller tool here to clean up this edge here. Coming on the inside and then kind of rounding that over a little bit. And I think I want to make that I think we're okay. It's just a tad fat, which is what I would like. At this point, you're probably okay to take that pen on and off, but once we start getting this worked and thin, you want to leave it on the lathe. Now I'm going to move my tool rest down a little bit, and I'm going to just begin working this down. I'm going to come up and leave about this much of it fat, maybe a 1/2 inch, a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch or so beyond the taper, and then start to narrow it down here. Now we're starting to get there. We have a lot of chatter because the pen is going to get pretty thin at one point, but I'm going to make this same thickness all the way down. I found if I do that first, I used to just taper as I went, and then the whole pen just gets too thin, as you'll see at one point here. I'm going to go ahead and pause you while I do that. So we've got this fairly uniformly thin. Now I'm just going to begin working on the taper. I'm going to use this as much as I can, but my experience has been with these lightweight woods, which is what I tend to use for these pens, that eventually they just get to where they vibrate too much, and you get all kinds of chattering on the pen, and you end up breaking them. I've got more than one pen here in the shop. I don't know if I've got one that is broken somewhere along the shaft that I need to repair, or maybe they're beyond repair. And there's a solution to that I'll show you. Of course, you want to have sharp tools, which my tools are not terribly sharp at the moment, but ultimately, it doesn't matter how sharp they are or aren't. You eventually have to finish it in a different way, which you'll see here. So I'm just going to work this as much as I can, slowly coming up. Each pass, I'm not going quite as far as I was before. I'm intentionally leaving some marks here that maybe you can see. I don't know, but each time I'm stopping a little bit further up the pen, which eventually will kind of build that taper. Now that little chattering is starting to occur right now. We're getting thin enough that it's starting that chattering I told you about. Now I don't know if you can see it on the video, but I can actually see the pen flexing maybe as much as a 1/16 of an inch. And if I'm not real careful, it'll eventually break. And like I say, I'm sure there's a lot better solution to this, and somebody more experienced at this than I would know the solution. But there you've got a bit of a taper on that pen now. So what I usually do at this point, when I'm starting to get all that chattering, is I switch now to some sandpaper. This is 100 grit paper, and it doesn't take very long to finish this out with sandpaper, because again, they are lightweight woods that I make the pens out of, so they're light in your hand, which means they sand fairly easily. So let me kind of show you how I do that, and then we'll pause while I work on it. I'm going to use the sandpaper to kind of clean up that profile on this grip section a little bit. Now I'm going to fold this and come into this area here where I can kind of round it a little bit better. The whole time I'm just kind of filling with my hand to try to get to the profile that I want. And so there we've got sanding lines in that, which we'll deal with later, but I think that's about the size of the grip that I want on there. I've rounded this and I've worked on this profile, and you can see here I've left it fat and it's beginning to taper. So now the rest of the time I'm just working the rest of this pen. a fairly coarse paper all the way down. So I'm going to pause you while I do that because it takes a while. Now we're kind of getting to a finish type of look. At this point I'm watching the pen for areas that maybe are fat or too narrow. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but this part of the pen here is just a little too fat. It's out of profile. We're narrowing, then we get fat, and then we narrow. I'm also looking for areas where maybe I've got gouge marks from the rougher tools that we were using earlier, such as right here. Again, I don't know if that'll show up on video, but there's some kind of chips here in the black walnut where the from the tool. So I'll just work that area with the sandpaper like this. I'll work this area with the sandpaper until I'm comfortable and happy with what I've got. Kind of constantly moving the paper so that I'm not cutting grooves in any one part. It does get pretty warm, the paper does, so you're not going to be able to keep it in one place very long anyway. Sometimes turning the paper long ways like this will help you even out a paper. And then sometimes also I'll take a piece of hard straight wood like this piece of MDF and you can do this, which will take off the high spots as well if you really were looking for something really straight. I'm feeling like we need a little bit more work right there. The tool mark was a little deep, and I kind of like these pens to taper fairly quickly right here after the grip section anyway. So I'm going to take that down a little bit more. This whole time being careful and remembering that we've still got other grits of paper we need to go through, so we don't want to get too fine too quick. Now you can see why it was important that we had a good square joint right here, because this is where that glue joint is. We also have some screw thread coming up about this far in here. So now you see why I say we don't want it really long, because eventually you get out here and you don't have enough wood and the pen breaks because of the taper on the threads on the screw. So now I'm going to switch to a finer grit of 150, and this starts to go pretty quick at this point. Now I'm very light on my hand now. I'm not wanting, in fact I kind of start heavy-handed and get lighter as I'm going, because I don't want to have to sand out a lot of gouges in the wood from the sandpaper. So in the beginning, when I'm trying to remove a lot of stock, I'll be fairly heavy-handed, and then as I'm moving along I'm lightening up so that the paper is not cutting as deeply into the wood. Now there are still sanding marks going around the pen like this. So what I'm going to do at this point now is work it like this, horizontally down the width of the pen, and that will take those out. Usually these grip sections are the worst because they're the ones that are made out of the hardest wood, and they take the longest to get those sanding marks out. But I've found that it's just very difficult to get them out any other way.
and it only takes a moment, and once they're gone, they're pretty much gone. Because the next papers are so fine that we're not really going to put those grooves back in again. I always do go horizontally down the paper anyway, or pen anyway, just to be safe. But most of the lines are put on from the 100 and the 150 grit paper. Now, something that you can, a trick you can employ, just a piece of toilet paper or paper towel. If you come and hold that on there, kind of heats up the wood a little bit and puts something of a very crude buffing onto that. But it allows me now to see what that wood's going to look like. I'm checking for those scratches going around the pen. And you're not going to find much up here because this wood is figured. It's got that pattern in it, so you can't really see it. By the way, this is sycamore. I really like sycamore. A lot of drawers and stuff used to be made out of sycamore here in the U.S. years back, but much of that wood has disappeared, and so we don't see it as much as we used to. But I really like it because it gives you a pattern this direction, and again on the other side, and then a different pattern here. The wood looks, I thought I had a piece up here, right here. And this is how it looks before it's sawn, or before you turn it. Not nearly as impressive, but it does make a really beautiful pen, as you'll see when we're finished with this one. All right, I'm going to do the same thing now with the 220 grit paper. I'm not going to keep you on the whole time, just to save time on this video, but I'm going to now just clean up with 220. It really doesn't take much. So I've finished with the 220, and now I'm just doing the same rubbing in this direction to make sure I don't have any lines. Use the same paper trick. Got that nice and clean and a little bit shiny, and we look good. Now, you can finish the end of the pen any way you want. I tend to prefer them not to just be, cut off right there. So I'll show you now how I put the little bulb at the end. I'm going to take this gouge and start by making a section. Can you see how it flex in the pen? That's what we're got to be real careful about. And now I'm just going to start cutting in, getting a little deeper every time. I think I'm going to try to come in here and make this a little, it appears to me as though it gets fat just before it gets up there, and I don't like that. Okay, maybe something like that. And now we're back to this game again, but I can use fairly small pieces of
paper now because I'm only working this little area right here. Now, by the way, you'll see me working this side as opposed to this side. This side here wants to pull it to you, and you can lose your paper if it binds up. This side tends to be a little bit user-friendly, plus my hand is not obstructing my view. So you do it however you like. That's how I like it. Switching to a 150. Now I'm going to start working this side as well. This is the part that gets really picky or dangerous, whatever word you want to use. Because this is just barely bigger than a toothpick right here. And so there's not a lot of strength in that piece of wood that's holding that whole the whole pen and taking all of the stresses. Well, we ran out of memory, so this may be two parts, and if I can't stitch that together. I've finished this whole pen sanding up to 220, and this is now 500 grit. It goes really, really fast, and I don't even know that it's really necessary. I do it because I have it. And if you're going to put a gloss finish on the pen, it's kind of nice to have that 500 grit finish on there. I don't know if you could hear that squeaking, but that was the spindle here spinning inside the pen. So it just needed to be tightened up just a hair. So I just snugged it ever so slightly. Not too much, because we don't want to break it. All right. Get our paper out and I'll show you that trick again. Well, it just did that for us. So normally I take it off of the tool and cut that off with the razor. There we go. Like I said, it's super fine right there. And I got that not as clean as I would have liked. If I'd have cut that off with the razor, I would have done it a little further up. But here's our pen. I think it's a good size. It fits me fairly well. Now, the way I deal with these ends, because you're always going to have a rough end no matter how you do it, is I'm back to my 150, and in this case, this little bulb on the end is going to end up a little shorter than I had imagined it to be because of the fact that it broke off the lathe like that. But I'm just blending that in as nicely as I can. I'm dragging and rolling the pen so I've got a nice bulb on the end of that. Now to the 220 or the 150, we just kind of do the same thing again, but now that I've got it basically shaped, I just stick it in and twist it around. Now to get rid of those marks. And to the 220. And a quick one with the 500. Now in the final part, we'll finish this. Finishing refers to what treatment we put on the pen, whether it be oil or some kind of varnish or lacquer or something along those lines. And there are two that I generally use. One is a lacquer and the other is just an oil finish, depending on how traditional I want to be and what I think looks good. I really like to finish black walnut with just an oil, but I like to finish sycamore with a varnish. So I'm not sure how we'll do this one. I think I may finish it in an oil because that's something that is available to everybody, and I think it'll look just fine. If it doesn't, we'll put a varnish on top of it, and that's okay to do if we use the right kinds. So there we go. That's step 2, the turning of the pen. All right, this is how I tend to finish these pens. This little bottle has some boiled linseed oil in it, which is a more traditional type of finish. It's not a real durable finish, but it looks really nice. This is something that you can use if you want a more durable and shiny finish. It's just a spray lacquer. There are several varieties that you can get, but this Watco works well for me. The way that I do this is I take a little skewer with some tape on it, and I just stick it inside there. And then if I'm building several of these, I've got a board with holes drilled in it, and I can just set them all in there. Now I thought I would show you this. This is a piece of sycamore that's got that lacquer on it, and a piece of cherry down here at the bottom. So we'll kind of compare with this linseed oil. I just put a fair amount on this rag, and then I'm rubbing it on. It's really hard to mess up this finish. You just keep putting it on until it quits taking it. It'll soak into the wood, kind of dry a little bit, and then you put more on. Boiled linseed oil comes in a much bigger jar, but this is what I just moved it to the small one for convenience sake, so I don't have a large jar out here.
Now, if you've got any scratches in the wood, this is the point at which they would become very apparent when you put that finish on. But there are none, as you can see. That sanding horizontally took care of all those. But that wood is really coming out nice. I'll keep adding layer upon layer on this till I've got quite a few, maybe 10 layers, and until the wood just seems to have soaked up most of what it will. The nice thing about this finish is it can be replenished just the same way, so if you're using your pen and the finish is starting to come off, just reapply. Doesn't take any special equipment, doesn't have to be a dust-free environment. It's just a lot of advantages to oil finishing. When I'm done, I take the ferrule and just pop it in the end, and the pen is complete. I'll pause this and go grab a ferrule. I just realized I don't have one out here, so give me just a moment. So here's a ferrule. This is where your nib goes. It's just a steel tube with a tooth here to bite into the wood so that it doesn't fall out. All you do is stick it in. I tend to find the part of the grip section that I like, that I think I'll be holding like this, because I have a habit of when I'm putting my pen in my nib in my pen to stick it in. I use this groove in the ferrule, and I kind of tend to stick them in the same way. So if I put this in like this, and I were using this pen, then I would be seeing the prettiest section of the grip when I was writing. But there you go, the completed pen. So I'll just keep feeding this one until it's done. It usually takes a day or two to get it all soaked in, and then I'll pop a ferrule in this one, and this one will be done. I hope you enjoyed this little series on how to make a dip pen. It doesn't take an awful lot of effort. It does take a little bit of tools, but it's something that's enjoyable and rewarding, and you can make it with just almost any scrap you have laying around the shop. So really figured pieces of wood that are cut-offs and stuff like that make good pens. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.